I went ahead and designed a 3-part spool. I think it's going to be a lot easier mounting cross stitch to that because you can mount it on there first and then put the spool together. You can also put some foam, floral foam or something like that, so that your scissors can stick into it. You can put some weight in there if you want. You can glue it or not glue it. I probably would not glue mine. They're a little easy to put on there, but I'd like them to be a little bit harder to put on because I want that to stay. So I do need to adjust a little bit on that. But the solid one is pretty much solid on the inside, even though I only did like a 15% infill. It's going to take more plastic and probably more time to print. So on this one, you don't have to worry about supports or anything, because all you have to do is print 2 of the caps and then your cylinder, and so you don't have to worry about how it comes out on the printer. At the end of this video, or right after this, there's going to be some instructions for going into TINKERCAD and changing the files so that this will still fit onto here. So if you want a taller drum or a fatter drum, smaller or whatever, it's going to affect the way all these fit together if you don't pay attention to all the parts that make it up. So I've got a little video showing how to make changes. Okay, I want to show how I do this 3-part spool. So you have 2 caps, one for the top and the bottom. It's going to be easier to print than the one that's all together. And I just want to show all the components that make it up. So you got your drum, you got this little insert that's supposed to fit inside here, so it needs to be just a tad smaller. You got this little ledge here that the cylinder or the drum sits on, and then you have your base and however thick you want the base to be. So I just wanted to show all the parts involved. So I'm going to hide this cylinder, and I'm just going to make a duplicate copy of this so we can refer to it. Control D, and I'm going to hide one copy of it, and let's change the color of this to something else. Okay. Alright, so let's build the cylinder first, and to do that we're going to need to know how big our project is. So I'm going to go to my circumference calculator, which is omnicalculator.com, and change all your units of measurement to inches, because most of your patterns that you're going to buy are going to be in inches. So let's say my pattern is 6.5 inches long. Well, it needs to wrap around the circumference of the drum. So I plug in 6.5. You can add, a little bit to it if you think you need a little wiggle room. And then these numbers are going to change. So the radius is half of the diameter. So weird things happen in TinkerCAD when you're dealing with the radius and diameter, but we'll deal with them as we get to them. So I'm going to put this off to the side so I can refer to it. And alright, so let's build the cylinder first. So this time I'm going to use a tube instead of building the cylinder first and then cutting a hole in it, because the way I built the other one I cut a hole in it, but I think the tube might be a little bit easier to work with for this one. So I just drug the tube in there. And so remember, as much as possible, put all your measurements in here first before you start manipulating it over here. So let's change the sides. I think that's going to smooth it up quite a bit. And we're going to leave the wall thickness as 0.125, which is 1/8 of an inch. You can change it to however thick you want the walls to be. So the radius here, they have this at 1 inch diameter, so the radius here is half. So I'm looking at my Omni calculator, and I realize that my diameter needs to be 2.069014, but I'm just going to round it down to 2 inches. But I want to change it here instead of here, just so I don't get any weird stuff happening. So I'm going to go over here to the radius, and it's going to be half of that 2 inches, which I'm looking at my calculator, and the radius is showing as 1. When I do that, it does not change the wall thickness. So whenever you are editing your pattern to make a bigger drum or a smaller drum, you can change it on this tube object by just changing things in here. So I've got everything the way I want it in here. The radius is 1, diameter is 2, and I can check it here. It is 2 inches. That's about right. And now I need to change the height of it to match my pattern. So let's say my pattern is 3.5 inches tall. So I'm just going to type in tall, 3.5. So I did go in here to settings, and I changed my units of measurement to inches. Most of the time I'm working in millimeters. You can get more exact with millimeters, but since we're working with specific cross-stitch patterns, it's probably better to change it to match. Alright, so what we need to do is build this thing right here. So I'm going to ungroup it so I can show you all the parts that are involved. So on this base piece is actually 2 pieces. I have my cone that I used. I made this, I think, a couple of millimeters thick so that I wouldn't have such a thin edge. You can make this base as thick as you want it. This is the piece that's going to fit inside the hole of your drum. And of course, this cookie cutter hole here is the diameter that you're going to poke your scissors down into. So you can change that without affecting anything else in the pattern. But if you change your cylinder, it's going to affect all of these things too. So the first thing I'm going to start on the bottom and build this little base plate first. So let's use a cylinder, and I want to change the colors of these to all, let's make them all brown or gray, something easy to see. I'm going to kind of separate them out a little bit. You see this little ledge that the cylinder is going to sit on. So let's select the cylinder that we just did. We're going to smooth this thing out. I want this to be as wide as I want the base of my spool to be, what it stands on. So let's just make it about 3 inches. So you'll have to change the width and the length. I have to zoom out so I can see that number. Let's move everything back over here. Alright, I don't need it that thick, so let's make it about 1/8 of an inch or so, just for demonstration purposes. And so that's going to be what this thing sits on, okay? So, but we have to build that. So I'm building everything from scratch. So let's set that to the side. And let me check my measurements. It's 3 inches. So let's grab a cone. And this is one that gets a little crazy in here. I've come up with, base radius doesn't necessarily mean radius. I don't know why. Okay, because normally you take half of the diameter of whatever it is you're doing, but it doesn't work. So I'm going to smooth it out by changing the sides to the maximum. So I want the base, let's change the base, let's change the height. I'm going to go from the bottom up, 0.5 inches tall. It's probably tall enough. Let's make the base radius, normally I would say 3 inches because it would match this one here, but for some reason on this one it's not correct, so I'm going to say half of that measurement. And you see it's going to be about the same size. And the top radius, I need it to be the same diameter as this one, because this one's going to sit on that top of that. Right now it's this little pointy thing, but we need a little flat top to it. So let's change the top radius to 1, since it's half of what that other is. And I can just slide this over here and see it looks pretty good now. So there's my my little angled spool bottom, but this is 1/8 of an inch thick, and this needs to sit on top of that. So I need to raise this 1/8 of an inch. So I usually just start raising it until it lands on it. If it doesn't, you can come in here and type 0.125. So I'm just going to set this over here for a while. It's not really lined up right now. If you wanted them to be, see, that's not, it didn't raise it up the right height. The height of this one is 1/8 of an inch. Let me drop it. I'm going to change that to 0.125. Oop. Changing the wrong thing, Geraldine. Okay. Yeah, it's 1.125, so it should sit. Now it looks okay. It didn't a minute ago. but it needs to be raised up to sit on top of this one, is what I'm trying to do. So now everything's looking good. So I've got the base, I've got the cone part, but I need this little insert that goes inside of the drum to hold the cap on. But I don't know what the measurement of this inside diameter is. So if I know my wall thickness is 0.125, I double that and I subtract it from the 2. So that would give me 2 times 1/8 is a quarter. So I take a 1/4 inch away from 2, and that should give me the inside diameter there, and that would be the 1.75. All right, so we need to build a little disc to fit inside of here. So we'll use that cylinder tool again, do my changes here as much as possible, and we're gonna make it less than the 1.75 that we came up here, because it needs to slip in there. Again, I'm going to do a test print anyway. So let's just make it 1.65. Although 1/8 of an inch more is too much. Let's just make it 1.7, because I think that's going to be sufficient. But look, for the sake of looking at it, let's just change it another color and kind of put these together, and maybe we can tell. So just line them up, and then I'm going to turn this platform upside down by using my right mouse button and dragging, and you can kind of see a little bit of daylight here. You don't want too much. It's hard to know. In millimeters I can figure it out, but in inches I can't. You know, it's hard for me to think in inches. All right, so we don't need it this tall, so let's make it about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch, because it just needs to slip inside here and hold everything together. So I'm going to go ahead and I know that this bottom disc, the little orange one, is 1/8 of an inch, and this is 1/2 of an inch. So I need to raise up this one here to the same height so I can stack them all together. So I need to raise this 5/8, 0.625. I think you can type in the fractions if you want to. Oh, I didn't want to do that. I'll leave that at 1/2 of an inch. I need to raise it right here, 0.625. I can't read those tiny numbers there. All right, so that's going to sit on top right there, and then we need to make our little hole for the scissors to sit in. So you're going to grab your cylinder here, and let's make that. I'm just going to make it 1/2 inch, even though I know that's too big because I've tried that before. But just for the sake of doing this whole lesson, let's make it tall enough to cut all the way through, and we're going to stack all these together right here, line them up, and weld them together. So you could call this done if you think it's all going to fit, and you can send these parts out to your printer. You need 2 of these and 1 of these. But if you want to do a test print, here's what I do. I'm going to go ahead and delete those. I'm going to select the ones that I think are good, and I'm going to press Control D and hide 1 copy. And I know mine are orange. So to do a test print, we don't need to print this whole base. We just need to know if this little cylinder is going to fit inside of here. So let's take our drum and make a duplicate. I think I already made a duplicate copy. We're just going to make this really short, maybe 1/4 inch. We'll print that up, and then we're going to ungroup this, and we're going to only keep this green cylinder, and we're going to delete this. Remember, I have an extra copy made. So I need to drop that down to the base and then change the height of this. Doesn't need to be, let's make it 0.375, just a little bit taller than this other. And what I would do is send both of these to my printer, export them out together, send it to the printer, print it up, and see how well this insert fits into this cylinder, our test cylinder. And let's go back to my one that I just made. I think it's this one, and this one. I'll hide the rest of this stuff. I'm getting a bunch of garbage in here. Alright, so this is the one we just made. So if I did my test print and this was too big or way too loose, I would adjust it here, do another test print, and then once I know that this is right, I would come over here and ungroup the one that I think is good. It was good, and I'll ungroup it, and I'll come in here and I'll change just that cylinder to match my test piece. And then you line everything back up and weld them all back together again, and then you've got, so you don't really need to mess with this drum once you get it made. But if you ever want to make a different size, I would just duplicate these, start with the cylinder first, and then start adjusting the other pieces to fit. So you would have to adjust this cone shape to match the diameter. The top radius of this needs to match the diameter of the cylinder, and this little disc at the top needs to match the hole of your new cylinder. So hope all that makes sense.